Hello, everybody. I am so sorry for jumping on a little bit late on Friday again. I was just on a call and we went a little bit over. So here I am. It's almost 11:30 on Friday and I am back for another Friday live with Kylie. Since I didn't have any questions or specific things that you guys wanted me to talk about today, I decided that today I was going to talk a little bit about circadian rhythms, so related to sleep, and then also our sleep and our stress hormones and how those are all, you know, one other piece of our sleep puzzle. Um, so to start, in the first few weeks of life, babies don't really have the circadian rhythm going yet to the same extent as we do as adults. And so, this is kind of like what helps them know the difference between daylight and nighttime. And this doesn't generally start to become kind of fully formed or fully functional until about weeks 12 to 16. So let's chat a little bit more about what the circadian rhythm actually is. So the circadian rhythm, it controls the timing of many events in your body. So it's not just related to sleep, it's actually related to things like hunger, feeding patterns, hormone production, also like our voiding or bathroom needs, and then also timing of different activities. And our circadian rhythm is controlled by the exposure to lightness and then also darkness. And our bodies actually change in response to this light and darkness in conjunction with this kind of biological clock. So in the morning, when the sun rises, our blood pressure and our body temperature rise. And as the sun goes down, so does our metabolism. We get a little bit slower and then we get sleepy. And while we're sleeping, our bodies repair themselves. And then when we enter our deep sleep, our body temperature drops as well. And so this circadian rhythm is sort of like our body's master clock. It controls the production of various hormones. And one of them is really important in relation to sleep, and that is called melatonin. There's other hormones that are involved in sleep as well, or that are all contributing, and they all kind of work together. But melatonin is a big one. And this is sort of the calming hormone that helps to make us sleepy. And our circadian rhythm is really hardwired to our eyes. And so when it gets dark, this part of our brain cues the pineal gland to produce melatonin, so that we can then sleep and have more melatonin production at night until the morning. And so, as I mentioned, babies don't really have their circadian rhythm developed until about that 12 to 16 weeks of age, which is when they start to release their own melatonin. Until then, they really do rely on us to help them distinguish between day and night. And then they also are getting melatonin from mom's breast milk in the evenings, which can also assist with sleep. And so this is one of those reasons why babies generally do fall asleep when being nursed, especially in the evenings and during the night. And so I want to just remind all of you that it is totally 100% okay to feed your baby to sleep, to nurse them to sleep. You are not creating bad habits. In fact, you are actually following normal biological patterns. All right? Unfortunately, that's not necessarily the same for formula-fed babies. As you can imagine, there's not the same kind of melatonin assistance there. Okay, so I just mentioned melatonin, which is a hormone. I want to just briefly look at what hormones are. So hormones are not just about periods and hot flashes, although that's sort of what we kind of generically view them as. Hormones are actually chemical messengers that play in our body and that influence kind of nearly all functions. So everything from temperature to heartbeat, blood sugar, fertility, mood, and then also sleep patterns, as well as our stress levels. And yes, babies do have hormones as well. Everybody has hormones. All humans have hormones. Whether you're female, whether you're male, whether you're baby, whether you're elderly, we all have hormones that are playing and interconnecting between inside our bodies. And so they do also, so as I mentioned, they're interconnecting. They also have a domino effect. And there's two specific hormones that we need to pay kind of closer-ish attention to when it comes to sleep specifically. Those two are cortisol and melatonin. And I will briefly talk about some of the other players as well, like adrenaline, which is closely linked to cortisol, and then serotonin, which is closely linked to melatonin. But where do hormones come from? The short answer is that they actually come from our endocrine system. And our endocrine system is responsible for synthesizing and secreting these hormones, but some other organs are also involved in producing hormones, but even though it's not really their main function. So the endocrine system is really a big player in terms of producing and synthesizing the hormones. And so most people associate hormones or hormone production with our reproductive system, and that is a big one. But we often are ignoring the important function that like our adrenal glands, our thyroid, pancreas, all of those also include a lot of functioning with hormones. And so just as kind of a generic overview, the endocrine system is responsible for things in our body like metabolism, growth and development, sexual function and reproduction, heart rate, blood pressure, appetite, sleeping and waking cycles, and then body temperature as well. And so I want to focus primarily on hormones that are associated with mood, sleep, and stress, as these are really the ones that are the primary ones associated with babies and sleep, and they tend to come the most kind of imbalanced over time. So the sleep hormones are cortisol and melatonin, and the stress hormones are cortisol and adrenaline. And then there's other mood hormones like serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin. And for ourselves as mamas, we should know that low levels of estrogen also affect mood, as do elevated levels of cortisol. And this is why managing our stress and really making time for self-care is a really big part of our role as parents and also for our baby's sleep, especially when we are exhausted due to lack of sleep, right? So as I mentioned, the two main sleep hormones are cortisol and melatonin. And then we've got other kind of more supporting hormones like serotonin, which actually helps with melatonin production, and then adrenaline, which is connected with our stress and therefore with cortisol production. And then there's oxytocin, which is also related to helping actually reduce stress and promote calm and relaxation. And oxytocin is the kind of love, happy hormone. So sleep is a 24-hour cycle. So it's not something that happens when you go to bed. It's largely regulated by our sleep hormones, but it's also affected by our stress hormones. So let's start with melatonin and cortisol. Melatonin is a naturally occurring hormone that regulates sleepiness, and it peaks in the bloodstream just before we go to sleep. It's often known kind of like a sleep trigger. And melatonin is made in the brain by converting tryptophan first into serotonin and then into melatonin, which is secreted at night by the pineal gland in the brain to induce and maintain sleep. Cortisol is known as the stress hormone, but it's also the hormone that wakes us up. And cortisol levels are generally their lowest about 3 to 5 hours after we fall asleep, and then they start to rise slowly throughout the night, and they usually peak around 8 a.m. So essentially in the morning, your cortisol is what makes you wake up. And in the evening, your melatonin is what makes you sleepy. So that means that at bedtime, we want our melatonin to be high and our cortisol to be low. During the night, melatonin will start to decrease and cortisol will start to rise. And then there comes a point when they actually cross and cortisol is higher, and that's when we wake up. And this is the same for adults as well as for babies and children. Sometimes these hormones get out of kilter, and they can become out of kilter pretty easily, and our sleep might be disrupted. And so it can be useful to know how to regulate them. So hormonal factors that influence sleep include making too much cortisol, making cortisol at the wrong times of day, and also not making enough melatonin. So I talked about melatonin and how this gets made by converting tryptophan into serotonin and then serotonin into melatonin. And that melatonin is really heightened at night once the sun goes down. So let's take a look at cortisol for a sec. Cortisol is known as that stress hormone, and oftentimes I think it gets associated just with stress and viewed as something bad. And it's not something that we need to view as bad in general. Remember, we still do need to make cortisol in order to wake up and be alert and focused and all of that during the day. But we really do want to be careful that our cortisol levels don't get too high, because that's also going to affect their balancing at night. And so although we do need this cortisol hormone for our circadian rhythm to be functioning efficiently, if it's too high, either during the day or at night, it can lead to baby or us sleeping poorly and possibly waking very early in the morning. And so this is often why, as adults, we can kind of have this, thought or understand this better, is that when you're stressed as an adult, you might find yourself waking up at 4 or 5 in the morning because your mind is just racing, 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 racing. Or maybe it's more difficult for you to fall asleep because you're just thinking about all of the things that you didn't get done that day, or all of the things that you have to do the next day. Okay? So that is literally the cortisol is pumping through your body, and it's not allowing your body to calm down and relax. And so the same thing happens for our babies and our kids. And the reason is because the cortisol is so high, and so that melatonin cortisol balance is just not happening the way that it should be happening. Okay. So for babies and children, one of the main reasons cortisol levels can be too high is from sleep deprivation. And sleep deprivation can lead to stress, which then can lead to increased cortisol. So this is why it's really important to try to make sure that your babies are not overtired and that they are getting enough sleep during the day, even if that's like a 20-minute nap 4 times a day, right? Or more than that if they're younger. But this is why we don't want to keep baby up for too long. We want to do all that we can to even help them get like a 20-minute nap so that they're not getting into that overtired state. So that could be a moving nap, that could be a nap on you, that could be going for a drive in the car. Anything that you need to do in order to get them to just have like that quick kind of restoration nap can do wonders. So other things that can lead to increased levels of stress and therefore increased cortisol include things like being left to cry, so unattended or unsupported. And this is kind of the unfortunate part of more traditional sleep training approaches. Even those that say they use the gentle approaches to sleep training, babies that are left to cry themselves to sleep have higher levels of cortisol even when they are asleep and not crying. And there's a lot of research being done on this, that even though they stop crying, their cortisol levels are actually still heightened. What is happening is that they're learning that the crying does not get them what they need. The crying does not get their parent to come back or their caregiver to come back and comfort them. And so they just stop crying, but their cortisol is still heightened. This also goes for being left to cry uncomforted for prolonged periods during the day. And so it's different when your baby is crying, because we all know that babies cry. There's not really any way around that. They cry for various reasons. That's their way of communicating. But when you are there as a supportive presence, even if you can't stop the crying, babies' systems are regulating and co-regulating off of you. And so if you are there as a loving presence, if you are there, trying to comfort them, trying to figure out how to help them and why they're crying, they can tell. And so their cortisol level, yes, it might be a little bit heightened, but it's not so heightened and elevated because they understand that there is that love, that support, that connection, that you're trying to do something to help them. Okay, so it's a little bit different. The other thing that can lead to stress is things like light from screens. So whether that's TV, computer, phones. So having these on while you're around baby in the evening before bed can potentially impact their natural circadian rhythm and therefore the natural kind of hormonal production mechanisms as well. Other things that might be causing stress include things like sensory processing differences, overstimulation, and things like that. So, even having a really overstimulating day, if you're running errands, if you are doing lots of Zoom calls with baby classes, if you are, having lots of toys that make loud noises or have bright flashing lights, all of that stuff can cause overstimulation for baby. So, when babies' cortisol levels increase too much during the day from these various stressors, this can often lead to going to sleep with higher than normal cortisol levels and therefore doing things like waking early in the morning, um, waking more frequently at night, so not having those long chunks. And this obviously also depends on the age of the babies, because sometimes it is still very normal for younger babies to be waking up frequently throughout the night to actually eat. So it's not necessarily related to their cortisol, it's actually related to their need for nutrition and hydration. But for older babies, this is definitely something to be looking at and to keep in mind. I wanted to just quickly take a look at serotonin levels and their effect on melatonin as well. So serotonin plays a role in the sleep cycles as well, and high levels of serotonin are actually associated with more wakefulness and lower levels of sleep. And serotonin is synthesized by the pineal gland to make melatonin. Um, but very low levels of serotonin can actually also include or result in sleep disruptions, sleep disorders, insomnia, things like that. So that's another thing that we have to try to maintain balance in the serotonin, because if you're too high or too low, it can affect sleep as well. There are definitely some sleep inducing foods that are high in tryptophan, which is the precursor to melatonin. But also getting daily movement, daily exercise can help to kind of start stimulating the serotonin as well, which then gets converted into melatonin. Also, things like high carbohydrate foods like potatoes and different grains have higher levels of tryptophan. Lots of cheeses and meats do as well. If you want more information on that, I do have a list of those in my 5 quick tips to getting more sleep guide. So if you don't have that, let me know and I can post the link. Yeah, what else did I want to talk to you guys about hormones? So basically, what do we do about this? How can we help restore or maintain balance in these hormone levels? So we want to help reduce cortisol levels during the day, and then we can help in the evening with things like diet, stress management, and also using essential oils. So number one kind of goal is to think like a caveman. So when nighttime was approaching for our ancestors, it became dark, it became cool, and these are 2 factors that trigger melatonin production, which in turn then help with triggering sleep. So you want to try to replicate this at home, so lowering the temperature, darkening the room in the evenings. You can have dim lights during bedtime routines. You want to also reduce artificial light at night, so this will help make sure that melatonin production is not impacted. Bright lights, bedside tables, computer screens, TVs, smartphones, all of that kind of stuff, even street lamps sometimes can impact melatonin production for up to 1.5 hours. So dimming the lights in the house after dinner or at least an hour or so before bedtime is a great idea. Exposing babies and yourselves to natural daylight during the day. So while we're wanting to reduce the artificial light at night, we do want to expose babies to natural light when they're awake, and spending some time outside in the fresh air can also be really wonderful. And this is why often you will hear the recommendation to nap in a bit of a brighter location. So a room that is not completely pitch dark like it would be at night, as this is going to help babies' bodies to understand between day and night. You're also going to want to make sure that you're watching for your baby's cues so that they're not overtired and therefore triggering the cortisol production. So that will ultimately help them relax into bedtime. So you could be watching the wake windows, making sure that you're using this just as a guide instead of a rigid schedule, to try to make sure that they're not overtired. Having a bedtime routine is a really wonderful way to know what is coming. Familiar and predictable are seen as safe by our brain. So having a familiar routine and a rhythm to your evenings will help your children, babies included, to become calm and relaxed more quickly, and start to balance that natural balance of cortisol and melatonin. And then, of course, essential oils, which is one of my big passions, adding those into your daytime routine to reduce stress and promote those natural circadian rhythms, and also adding them into your bedtime routine to promote calm and relaxation and that melatonin production. And there's actually some essential oils like cedarwood, which actually help to stimulate the production. So they stimulate the pineal gland, which then stimulates the production of melatonin. And, citrusy oils like orange can be used during the day to help reset that circadian rhythm in preparation for the nighttime. And then things like lavender or chamomile can help relax and calm for sleep as well. So that is it for the video today. A little bit of information. We're just scratching the surface in terms of hormones in relation to sleep and stress hormones and how those relate to sleep. But as you can see, sleep is a big puzzle. This is just one more piece in the puzzle. But as you can see also, there are definitely some tools that you can do to help to start balancing these hormones, not just for your babies, but also for yourself. And remember that we are co-regulating always with our babies. So if you have any questions, please feel free to post them below the video and I will do my best to answer them. Happy Friday, everyone. Bye for now.